All right. It's the 21st of October. This is lecture number 9. It goes fast. So I want to present something. Escape from here. Play from start. These are my slides for this lecture. Settle down. Stop recording. No, turn on caption. Present now. Window. So, lecture number 9. And I'm talking about digital anthropology, although I want to put it in context. This one. So, can't see that very well, can you? Maybe I have to turn off that one. Doesn't make any difference. That just kills it. Right. All right. Still not very good. That thing is needs to die. Maybe when it's in color it will be better. Not much. Well, you can always go back and fast forward through the recording. So, I think last week, maybe the week before, I said something like that I was finished with doing a history of anthropology before, the critique of colonialism and so on. That's sort of true, but there's no way to talk about the digital anthropology without also knowing that it's a response in some ways to anthropology's history. Both digital anthropology and visual anthropology that I'll talk about next week, at least in the UK and elsewhere, but mainly the UK I know about, was a response to recognition of that history, the colonial history and the problems of anthropology, or the guilt that anthropologists felt for having been bound up with colonialism and, so ethics 2 weeks ago, but also recognizing that just staring at people and writing books about them is a bit strange. So there was various reinventions of anthropology. Writing culture was one, to think about what it is that anthropologists do. Another one, there was a turn to phenomenology, reading Heidegger and the phenomenologists, and then, I don't know, writing books about what it's like to be a tree or a leaf or things like that. There was a move for, I don't know, all sorts, several other anthropological turns, let's say, auto-anthropology, anthropology at home. Now, visual anthropology probably was the first really successful post-anthropology's guilt movement, where, at least in Manchester at first, then at Goldsmiths, with a program set up by Steve Nugent, who died recently, and myself, visual anthropology became a thing. The Granada Centre for Visual Anthropology in Manchester, where I was in the 90s, not in the Granada Centre, but I was in that department, had a real orientation to visual anthropology that was cinema verite, fly on the wall kind of filming. So they filmed people doing whatever they do as if the camera wasn't there. But the one at Goldsmiths that we set up with Steve was a very kind of grumpy but very humorous man. He didn't make jokes, but everything he said was funny in a wry way. So very droll, very. If you didn't understand that he was joking, you would be upset with him, and a lot of people did get upset with him. But his take on anthropology was a bit better than just put the camera in front of people and film. To understand that the camera changes the environment. He was more political as well. Anyway, I'm going to talk more about visual anthropology next week. The other significant move, and this is why I'm talking about it today, and going to try and contextualize it, was digital anthropology. Now that was later than visual anthropology. See how I'm breaking with the historical periodization. Digital anthropology was a part of a general reformation of social sciences and humanities that took into account the perception that computers and personal digital assistants, devices like this, have changed everything. And the reason why I want to talk about that before talking about visual anthropology is that there's a kind of hype abroad, everywhere, about new media, new technology. Like there are new opportunities and potential and everything is exciting. Technology 4.0. And I think it's a trick, a hoax, and at least I want to play with the idea, suggest to you and show you that every anthropologist is a bit biased, so you shouldn't trust them, show you that a position that can be very critical of this turn and not be one that you should necessarily agree with, right? I'm going to present my take on it for you to think through for yourself, and you maybe shouldn't agree. Maybe you think actually he's just an old guy, doesn't really know what he's talking about, which is very possible. If you spoke to my son, he would think that I have some very old-fashioned ideas. Stopping him from, he's got his own YouTube channel, and I don't want him to have a YouTube channel that only focuses on Minecraft, because for lots of reasons, but anyway. But so my take on digital anthropology is going to be critical and skeptical and maybe cynical, and it's to try and put it also in a, by doing that, I try and put it in a context so that we understand the much wider context for anthropology and why there are changes in anthropology. This is a bigger version, maybe it's not bigger, another version of the issue about why did anthropology change and become reflexive and think about itself and do anthropology at home at the very same time as the places where anthropologists used to be able to go became independent. When they all got their independence of colonialism, anthropology started to suddenly look back on itself. And I see that connection. It's really quite obvious. Well, I think the digital has a similar ideological or political problem. So I'm asking, does the digital mean a whole new era? Has everything changed? Are we now in the digital mode of production or something like that? Right, there are very good studies. Jonathan Bella's book called The Cinematic Mode of Production, about, which we'll talk about next week as well, about Fermantu. It's really good. I'm not saying that talking about this mode of production is not important, or the effect of digital, but I want to say what changed? What does the digital change? And I can see very clearly some changes that affect the day-to-day practice of anthropologists. When you used to do field work, when I started doing field work, I'm that old, I first went to Calcutta, and just to make a phone call home, it was a 3-hour operation to queue up at the post office to be allowed to use the international subscriber dialing phone, because there weren't so many international phone lines, and so it took a long time to pay and register and get the stamp and show your passport just to make a phone call, right? And it would take 3 hours. So that actually it was quicker to send a telegram. That only took about 1 hour, maybe even half an hour. Send a telegram. Now, hardly anyone sends a telegram now. A telegram is like a text, right? It came on yellow paper, very distinctive telegram paper, and you typed it out, and you had to spell out punctuation, like stop, instead of having a full stop. And it was, an old-fashioned way of communicating. So now, when you do field work, if you do it like I did, and like a guy called Mitchell Dunier had done a book called Sidewalk, where really in the book, something I think is quite good, everything he wrote about his people, he was working on street sellers on the sidewalk in New York. He wrote, and then he took the text to them and checked with them that everything was okay. And I've done the same with my work in Calcutta, taken my essays on Calcutta and given it to the people that I had studied to see what they would say. Often they went, oh yes, very nice, and said nothing. Sometimes they said, no, you've got that wrong, or you've misunderstood that, and they'd explain it, and I could change it. But of course, that meant going back to Calcutta. And my field work was finished, I wrote, and then I came back. I was lucky enough to be able to do that. I mean, I sold my guitar, I sold my motorbike each time to get a ticket to go to India from Australia. $700, I think they were. I had a really great Rickenbacker guitar once, anyway, and 1100cc Suzuki. But anyway, they went so that I could go back and check. Mitchell Dunier, his feedback to his so-called informants, problematic word, was easier because he was working in New York on people in New York, and he lived in New York. So he could just go back to up the street to talk to them. So his experience was more like what's happened now. Like if I write something about Calcutta now, even before I finish it, I'm writing to the people that I studied and worked with there to check things. You know, is this right what you said? Or have I understood this right? And I'll send an email and they will reply quite quickly. Right? And that's like so different to 25 years ago, where if I wanted to do that, I had to buy a ticket and fly there, and you know, you never just go for a day, you go for months if it costs you that much. So field work has really changed in that regard. And reflexivity and checking is more both possible and maybe more important. And of course, the ways in which we take notes has changed, the ways in which we interact has changed, and the people we study have also changed in a sense in that they've got digital devices as well. So they can reply to my questions. They've got email, they've got WhatsApp actually. WhatsApp is the dominant one in Calcutta that I communicate with them through. I mean, they also do use Instagram and a few others. So the informants are informed. But I want to say that that's nothing new. I mean, all right, maybe the speed of the exchange has changed, but The people I worked with were reading newspapers, writing books, writing letters, making telephone calls, just like me. So in some ways, that's not a change. It's just a different media, and the speed maybe has changed. Right? They've got email and Facebook, and all right. So, but maybe the issue is, and this is a wider issue for everyone, is that the shape of relationships has changed. So like I'm in more constant contact with them. In fact, I probably talk to the family that I've known for 3 generations now, for 33 years. So a woman who was this big when I first met her, then I went to her wedding and saw her little kids grow up. And when I was last in Calcutta, which was now 2 years ago, went to the wedding of her daughter. So her grandmother was there, 3 generations. And I've seen now first birthday and second birthday photographs on WhatsApp and in contact just a few days ago because it was the anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi's 150 years birth, right? And I gave a talk via Zoom in Bengal, and while there also they tuned in. So like the people who were informants, I do hate that word because it belongs to spying and the police, and maybe it's good to be reminded. But the people that were informants are going to Zoom lectures and online lectures as well of mine, and I go to theirs. And I see them, I'm in contact with them over distance as much, if not more, than the people that live on the same floor in my apartment block. I mean, I talk to my neighbor nearly every day. Well, the one diagonally I talk to nearly every day, the one opposite every few days. But not as often as I talk to my family who live in England, London, Bramhill, or Sydney or Melbourne, who I speak to every 1 or 2 days. And that's an interesting change caused by digital communication. Remember, it took 3 hours to make a phone call before in India, and I guess we have in the romantic idea of the old days, in a village or a town where you knew everyone and you talked to your neighbor every day, they knew your business, you knew theirs. That doesn't happen so much anymore. I mean, I wonder if you think today, when you, or this week, did you talk to your next door neighbor? Your next door neighbor, the person who lives in the house next to you, next to yours, did you talk to them? When was the last time you spoke to them? Not for a while. Sometimes we don't even know them anymore. But we have friends all over the world. So what I think we have now is the old, it's a romantic idea to think that the village, everyone knew each other and it takes a whole village to raise a child and all that. It's a little bit, it's never quite like that. Because there are some people in the village that don't want to speak to the person next door to them because of that fight over the fence and stuff, and for 20 years they've been, yeah. But the ideal of we knew everyone in the village has disappeared a little bit because of cities, because of modern life, but we're connected on a daily basis to people in other cities. So does that mean we have more friends, more connections, or is it that the density has changed? I don't know if you feel it now, but in the, say, the 90s, when email was coming up, people would often say, there's too much information. We have too many emails, too much, everything is speeding up. It's becoming too much, I'm overwhelmed. And I don't know if you feel that today, but my colleagues in the department say that. Because of the technology, because 10, 15 years ago, if you got a document from a committee, You had to sign it, read it, sign it, pass it to the next person. Now you get a document and you pass it to 50 people at the same time. And every single person is doing it. And it just increases people say, it increases the workload. And the speed in which you have to reply is quicker. You have to respond quickly and you get a faster, and okay, that means we're working harder and we're working faster and productivity gains, and in fact, we're also working 24 hours because the email is on, and personally for me, it's a fact of my condition because I've got 2 young children. I pick them up from school at 3 and I don't get anything done between 3 o'clock and 8:30 when they go to bed. So put them in the bath and feed them and do homework with them or whatever, right? And then I work from 8:30, 9 o'clock till 1 or 2. And I've done some work during the day, but my 8-hour day extends to 12 hours and so on, and it happens late at night. And I see the same happens for a lot of students because they email me at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, and I stupidly respond. I know I shouldn't do that because that just encourages people to do it again. But we are working longer hours because of always being on. But I wonder, now someone like Jacques Derrida had said that the whole public space and private space of life is changing because of, above all, email, he said. I think he was a little bit, well, for him, well, me too. His books, his early books, and my first book was typeset, not done electronically. That means that somebody took little lead, pieces of lead that they put into a frame that made a page that you printed paper on. It was made of lead, metal, lead type, old style of printing. And my Rumor of Calcutta book was done like that. The next one was done electronically. So you could easily make copies of the next one, particularly because just 3 years later, Rumor of Calcutta couldn't be copied for a long, long time until character recognition came in. Right? Because they made the book, costs a lot to do it. One person has to sit and put every letter in. It's not like you type it. You put the letter into the box of letters, right? And as soon as you print the book, you disassemble it. And all the A's go back into the A box, the B's into the B box, and so on. So that you can do the next book. So it's a big thing was a big thing to do a book until electronic publishing came in, and now anyone can produce a book. Not anyone, all right? It also costs money to have a connection and wiring and so on. But so Derrida is complaining in a way, saying there's this complete change in the public space because of the digital. I think, yeah, it's true, and yet, the telephone is an interesting device. If somebody calls you, you answer straight away. That's quick. And we had that before email. Email is a way of slowing down communication. Like, except for me, because I email straight away. I could, however, and I do for a lot of my other work, leave the email in the box and not reply for 1, 2, 3 days, a week, 4 months sometimes, right? Whereas the phone, it rings, if you answer it, and let's face it, you answer it because you still don't know who's calling often unless you've keyed in the thing, unless it's someone you already know, you answer. So that's instant communication. Email is slower pace. You actually have more control. So it sets up a kind of problematic scene where we've got a lot of talk about things speeding up, more information, coming faster, overwhelming and also great opportunities and 4.0 and hype. And then if we look at it, how many friends can you have? I mean, it says you've got 5,000 friends, but really you interact with, and the algorithm of Facebook only lets you interact with 25 or maybe 30 or something. You can counteract the Facebook algorithm. There's a program called Facebook Purity. You can load that on and it stops that algorithm. It sets your Facebook feed to always most recent. And then you see everyone again. But you know, the reason they have that algorithm so that you only see the top people who comment on you is you don't have space in your head, in your life for 5,000 friends. Like you'd become psychotic if you had that many friends, or you'd be, I don't know, maybe other people do have many more friends, but I couldn't. I manage about, I can track maybe 100 people or something. And after that, I start to, yeah. So are things speeding up or is the density changing? All right, things have changed for sure. I don't know my neighbor as well as I know someone who lives 1,000 miles away. And I communicate with that person more often. But is that really a difference? It's a difference in density, but not in speed and not in significance. Okay, because I don't live with my family. Well, I've got my own family, but if I don't live with my family, I can also say I'm doing things, say things to them and not do them because they're not watching in the same way. But that was true when I lived at home with my parents as well. I would tell them things and, you know, close the door and other things would go on. Lost years to those kind of activities. So I wonder if the digital talk about things speeding up, 4.0, isn't a bit of hype. And this difference between everyone talking about speed and actually things not speeding up doesn't have a wider context. And that context for me is that what's moving in the digital? Is anything moving in the digital? Capital at present is not moving. It's in a period of slump, stagnation, globally. I mean, that's not true for Vietnam and China and a couple of other countries that had 4 point or 7 point or whatever % growth. But on the whole, globally, and the BRICS countries, right? On the whole, globally, for a long time, capital has been in a kind of slump. Really a long decline since the 1960s, after World War II, the economic bubble, right? So there was a big depression in the 30s, 1929, Wall Street crash, the 30s, then war economy, and then the building to rebuild after the war kick-started the economy into a cycle of growth that lasted until the 60s, maybe a little bit longer in places like Japan and then Korea. South Korea, right? Affected by wars and so on. But really, since then, slump, stagnation, and crisis. The Japanese economy pretty much didn't move since the late 80s, 90s. All right, Australia a little bit, some fluctuations. US, UK, Europe in general, not really. I mean, Germany's done reasonably well, but their percentage growth right now is very small. And there were these crises, right? The tech bubble burst, the technical stocks were going to be, well, after the OPEC oil crisis of the late 70s, the next big thing was technological stocks, and they did sort of grow, and that industry grew until 2000 when it was well overextended. And because of venture capitalists and speculation, they'd invested in companies that don't actually produce anything. and there was going to be a crash, and there was a rectification. People said it was just a return to real value, but it wasn't. The stock exchange and the stock market, the NASDAQ or whatever you want, these things are called, is overinflated with value, and the profit makers in capitalism these days are ones that profit not from making anything, but from investing in futures that don't really exist, that are soon wiped off the market because of crashes and because of changes in stock market prices. Right? They are profiting from fictional financial exchanges. Right? Now, it's not true in Vietnam and not true in China because there is production. Right? China is making a lot of plastic goods for the whole world, flooding the world with cheap crap, basically, and Vietnam making trainers and coffee for export and a few things, right? So, but the rest of the world, economic crisis of the tech bubble, and then 2008 in banking, Goldman Sachs and financial services, and housing, which extended then to 10 at least, counting 12 years of austerity policy in Europe and America, meaning no growth, right? Nothing was moving really. I mean, some capital was moving, but there was no growth in production, no speeding up of production, except maybe the war economy. That's a way for governments to kick economies into activity, start a war somewhere, 2001, 2010, 11, Libya and Syria and the Middle East and so on, because arms sales, right? They never seem to have, arms sales never seem to have a slump. Right? The British economy now, they've become, again, the second largest weapons dealer in the world, and French and American, Chinese and Russian. So this long crisis where capitalism is not moving, and that's being extended right now because we've seen the environmental crisis and the COVID is effect on, well, the end of the global transport economy and the tourism economy, at least right now. Of course, yeah, growth area in pharmaceutical companies trying to find a cure, but it's not real movement on average. The global economy now remains stagnant and has no way of changing that anyone can see. I mean, what our period will be known for probably is not the digital and anything else, but the end of, well, maybe the end of the planet, we could destroy it, or the end of secure economy. Even the stagnant economy is falling apart because of climate change, because of health crisis. So that maybe our era will be known for the end of the world, or it will be known for finding a way out of it, managing the crisis. Okay. But you know, this thing, right? So that's on one hand, capital is not moving. On the other hand, we are continually feeling either overwhelmed by the amount of movement. Things are changing so fast, people say a lot, or we're really enthusiastic about it. Or maybe well, I don't know about you guys. Do you check your speed ever? Maybe there's something that's gone out of style a little bit. Do you check your internet speed? You do. Okay, the other class, maybe they didn't understand what I was talking about. You know, we're checking our speed to see how fast your connection is, 4G, 5G, 45 gigawatts per millisecond, and that's participating in the hype, right? You've got to have fast connection because you can't possibly work at a slower speed. You can't possibly. You've got to be able to live stream that film now. You've got to have your instant, like, online gratification, right? Why have we bought into this so lock, stock and barrel. We are completely doing it to ourselves, buying into this productivity gain for the benefit of who? The benefit of those capitalists who are still trying to keep the level up. Sure, okay, maybe all this is too cynical, and I should be in favor of the new media possibilities because we all can have our say. But, you know, I see everyone having their say and nobody's saying anything much. We're all talking, but we're not getting anywhere either. We're getting faster and faster bandwidth, but that's making us do more and more work. That in David Graeber, my friend who died a few, 8 weeks ago now or something, well, he talked about bullshit jobs. We're all doing work that really doesn't need to be done. I mean, he had a funny line once. He said, if all of the financial sector, all the services, and all the people that are trading in the stock market just packed up and went home, we'd have a whole lot of inner city buildings that could be repurposed as places for children to be playing, or childcare, or new gaming areas, or because no one would notice if they disappeared. If all the bankers disappeared, we wouldn't. That's not exactly true, but there's a little bit of sense in it. So, yeah, I've talked about this, the density of relationships are changing. And speed check. So this epoch, we might be well known for being the end of the world. Or it might be known as the time for the solving of these catastrophes. So we collectively come together and work out how to deal with climate change and economic disaster and health and COVID and so on. There are still those, though, that want to name the digital economy and say it's a good thing and theorize it and think about it. The creative economy, the cognitive capitalism as a new fold. There's Jean-Mulia Boutin, who has some theories about cognitive capital. And a man, I didn't mention him on the slide, but Bernard Stiegler, who died also from also in the last couple of months, but whose work was very interesting. Talking about the way in which we are now diversified workers, so that when all of us now work for Google in a way by helping the Google algorithm get better, because we search for things and we add microscopic amounts of value to that algorithm because it learns from our searches. And millions of us are all adding that little bit of extra efficiency to this. So that model of labor, cognitive labor and general intellect kind of thinking is what Stiegler talks about, although he was very critical of it. And I think even though we had differences, I wrote about them, I think he's onto a correct thing. Or immaterial capitalism, right? The service economy. Michael Hart and Tony Negri talk about this, and whole areas of work on this. I can't get into this, but the economy stuff that's hyping digital giga mega hyper talk is a part of you want that? Well theorized, well thought through philosophy. And we can talk about the framing aspects of this in the mode of production, right? So we talk about ways in which capitalist production proceeds. Taylorism, right? Having a trained person to do the same task over and over again is more efficient than having someone do all of the different tasks. And then Fordism, the production line. The worker as mass consumer, right? You can have any Ford car you like in any color as long as it's a T model and it's black. It's like pushing consumerism to that market. And then Keynesianism cycles and national prosperity, productivity, and the period after the war of inflation, but pushing ahead of inflation. So here's the difficult thing for Vietnam. Vietnam's productivity has been high, but its inflation is high as well, which is because it's in the international market and so on. But so while it's buoyant, there's not significant profit because of costs costs are going up as well to buy commodities. But that'll be why those that are taking a profit are investing in big houses and property, like over in where's Him Lam. Those big houses down there and places like that, they are putting your capital into something that is a bit inflation proof. Right? Whereas in the 60s, the inflation was very low, but profit taking was high. And it was a very different economic situation. Keynesianism. Transnational companies and the beginning of Toyotaism, if you like, globalization, financialization. Toyotaism, just-in-time production. Right? It wasn't necessarily faster production, but you only made the parts that were going to be needed for your contribution to a global commodity chain or production line. And cheaper labor, also places which could push cheaper labor were important. Those are ripples and folds and changes in production, but not speeding up, just rearrangement. So the density issue is there. Then what we have now under stagnation, the beverage state, as Mulia Butangs call it, driven by Starbucks. I mean, basically they make a very simple commodity, but they have a lot of propaganda around it. Now it's hard to talk about that in Vietnam, where Starbucks has not taken over yet, thankfully. Although the style of Starbucks has. Now there's the interesting thing, right? When Highland Coffee, Win Chung, whatever it's, all these different big chains are copying the propaganda style of Starbucks. Even the circular logo. Oh, Seattle Coffee Company started that, but they're still just selling coffee, right? A commodity which comes at exploitative cost for workers in the highlands, and there's an economy there, but added on, there's this massive beverage economy, beverage capitalism, creating money out of hype, or creating profitability out of hype making. People buy from you rather than from the small local coffee seller. And it's very rare where there's a city where those big coffee chains don't completely take over. And thankfully, Vietnam and Ho Chi Minh City is one of those. The others are Melbourne, where I'm from. There's still a lot of local coffee shops, and Starbucks isn't successful there. And then Italy, Greece, but not everywhere. Poland, lots of good coffee shops there, but they're not the chain ones. But there are chains elsewhere. Anyway, beverage capitalism, that's one where the conversation is, you know, you get your coffee with your name personally written on it. Yeah. And the bookshop angle is really interesting, right? So instead of getting people into bookshops because of books, we get them into bookshops because you can have a coffee. That's just so insane, right? And yet we do prefer it. It's really nice to be able to go and look at the books and have a coffee, but also a bit insane, right? Because a bookshop, they would do better if they got better books. If they stocked my books. Yeah. Anyway, this is the definition of beverage capitalism, is that the beverage is expanded to be a lifestyle, a whole a whole, more than a lifestyle even. It's a great thing. But at the same time, we've got the monetization and quantification of all of our relationships and more parts of our lives. Like I use the example often, I'm sure I used it in the first year course, that even your conversations are now timed and monetized. So you pay for your conversations to the second, and you pay in fact for your education. Not so much in places where there's state education still, although you guys pay fees. In the UK now everyone pays fees, and the students see themselves more often than not as customers, and they calculate how much time each minute in the class is worth to them, how much they're paying for it. They worked out it was something like, I don't know, £85 per hour for their time with teachers. So if the teacher sort of is not giving them full-on attention, they feel ripped off, right? Which is heavy burden on education, turning it into a productivity economy again. Of course, then UK universities are not surviving the crash that comes with COVID because the overseas students that were paying even higher fees are not there now, and so they're all having to cut back staff even more. That's by the by. At the same time, we had talk about lifelong learning. You have many careers in your life. You have to retrain a couple of times. But you know, even that could be a positive or a negative, but it's certainly the case that because of the introduction of fees on the one hand, the student population that used to be more mixed, there used to be older people. In my classes, certainly, there used to be a number of people that were retraining who were older, and they disappeared when fees were introduced, higher fees. Because why would they pay for something that, you know, they were doing as a retraining, as a hobby, or as an interest, or they didn't have that kind of parental capital. And we also have the effect of this technology, digitization, measuring and monetizing more and more parts of our lives. Like, for example, well, just so many parts of our lives being monetized. And in, I think it's the last lecture of the Culture in the World course, we talked about how domestic life was becoming more and more capital relation. So that your housework, your cooking was all done as an more economic relation, even though it was unpaid women's labour before and was an economic relation, of course. Now it's done by companies that deliver your groceries or deliver your food in packages ready to eat, grab food, or come and cut your hair or give you a massage. You can even pay to have people be your friends and so on. So more and more intimate parts of life are monetized. I mean, of course, some monetization of intimate life has been going on forever. The second oldest profession and all of that. And then, on the other hand as well, nothing moving. In fact, everything becoming stagnant and static. We sit in front of the console and hardly move. Just our fingers twitter. And literally on Twitter. Just move your fingers and maybe your eyes. Nothing else physical is happening. Unless you stand up and do some exercise and recognize that on your Facebook feed you're getting people telling you you're fat, and so you better join up and sign up for this 12-week course to do some exercise and lose it. This not moving, this metaphor of not moving, of course you can move if you want, but we're encouraged to stay still, and that is a ever more hyped, propagandized way of being super skilled but being de-skilled. yeah, we know how to use all of these apps and to move information around and so on, but we are being proletarianized. We're becoming, at all levels, just lowest entry-level workers, pushing data around. Right? Basic skills, and we're trained from childhood and teenage years by playing computer games, training to be an input data entry operator. Right? Minecraft or Space Invaders or whatever the latest games will be is a training for data input. Yeah, resistance to that, of course, exists. But identity politics, but also some street symbolism. Yeah. Sure. Okay, so we can theorize about how this situation, and it's a kind of stagnation. And the potential there, all our contributions to global knowledge and to Google, the algorithm and so on, is perhaps, yes, massive, never before seen international effort to increase the body of human knowledge. And anthropology could be that because fieldwork now becomes accessible to everyone. And just blogging becomes a kind of anthropology, and everyone has access to some kind of expression of thoughts and can add to the general intellect. Right? Marx's idea of what humanity had is a store of knowledge that, unfortunately, under capitalism is being monetized and controlled by capital investors, by money bags, but really is the heritage of those that shouldn't be alienated, that create the wealth of society, knowledge, money, knowledge, value, and so on. That gets turned into calculated, measured, monetized time. Okay, so for anthropology, less a danger of us becoming machine-like, because anthropology has this idea of going out to have a look for yourself, but and adds to this vast system, but it's doing it more and more in a mechanized way as well. In another course we do called critical thinking, I've been talking a lot about how the systems of the university now are also being monetized and calculus, and all of the structures of knowledge are being measured now, so that citations and footnotes and ISI is all a vast global system, and this is shaping the general knowledge of humanity, the general intellect. So a couple more minutes and then we'll stop. What has the digital done? So that was my question, right? And perhaps there's nothing new in new media, I'm saying. And this is something, something I'm saying that you should not take my word for it. Think about this for yourself, but I'm wanting to put the argument that there's nothing new in new media, and that in fact the big change for new media was earlier, was the democratization of access to the general intellect. That the arrival of books, as such a printing press that made it possible for more than just the clergy and the emperor and a few of the elite to have access to knowledge, was the revolution. And the digital aspect of that, of things, extends that access. It doesn't change it completely. And of course, it's still alienated. I mean, another thing you might say that the advent of television changed humanity much more than the advent of email. When television came into the home, right, audio, visual, life inside a home, after however many centuries of not having state access into the domestic sphere. Now the government station, the government channel or whatever, the whole ideology of Trump versus Biden is in our homes all the time. It's on the radio, it's on the television, inside our living space. And everyone knows that next week is the election. Well, actually, I'd kind of forgotten that next week is the election, but in the US. But it's like overwhelming. Why do I need to know about that? I don't. I do, of course, it affects my life, etc. But it's right inside my house where I live. It's on my, and that's for all of us. Now, but, you know, what do we need to do to understand this world of media theory? We need to question the descriptions. If someone tells you new media has changed everything, I'm just saying, take a step back and think about that. What has it changed? Yes, it's changed some things in how we do, but the problems of anthropology are still there, even though fieldwork has changed. And the problems of understanding social life in sociology or in the humanities are still there. But everything is still being monetized and changed into small units and manipulated for profit of some. Is still alienated from us. And I was watching a lecture from Gayatri Spivak last night, and I add as a final bit her comment on this. It won't surprise you to know that she also takes a position where she thinks that the digital, and she was talking about digital humanities, is a hoax, is a trick. She's saying what the humanities do is not what the digital does. The digital measures and turns things into measurable, quantifiable units, and then people talk about the digital humanities as deep data mining and managing data sets and so on. She was making this point at the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung, which is a research group named after Rosa Luxemburg, a revolutionary, but not really in that revolutionary tradition, but still quite good. So I'm not sure that I get everything that she was saying there, because sometimes she says things to provoke, but you have to make up your own decision and so on. But what I understand her as saying is that the humanities are in trouble because they're being called the digital humanities, and that's being seen as a reinvention in the same way that anthropology was reinvented as digital humanity, digital anthropology. But that it's quantifying. And so the scrubbing of, for her, it's not the humanities. The humanities is reading and understanding, studying and knowing. What you do with it after, that's also politics and so on, but to really study and know. And if you're reading texts with the new digital quantifying machinery, you don't get to understand. Understand there's an extent to which using these machineries to read helps you misunderstand, miss the point. So my understanding of this example is that we're being de-skilled, right? The fieldwork idea of going to have a look for yourself is lost if you are doing what I was doing just the other day, looking at some live feeds to a camera on the street in Calcutta. The very street that I used to go to do my fieldwork, I can now log in and watch that street by camera. But I don't have the relationship, the feeling, right? There's an alienation. And the same thing about what it is to read a book in the humanities. Now I've seen there are some people who are writing articles using these search mechanisms, and they're writing fine articles, there's no question about it, where they've gathered through using a search machine everything that Marx had to say about the family or about time. Right? You can go to the online archive of all of Marx's work and key in the search word time or value or family, and everything, every quote, every time that Marx has quoted time or mentioned time will come back to you in a search, and you can write about that. But you will never understand him on time if you read all of his quotes on time, unless you read what his argument was in the book, say the second volume of Capital, where he talks about the concurrent time of 3 different circuits of production. So like there's multiple time happening in the circuits of production, of circulation of goods, and of valorization of goods back into profit. And they happen simultaneously. But if you don't read the book for that argument, if you only searched and read the individual sentences mentioning time, you will never connect the two. And yeah. The same with translation machines, right? And this is something I do, and I'm sure you do. We're working in different languages to our own, the ones that we speak as mother tongue. And really to learn and read in another language, you need to have the experience of reading a whole text with all of its associations that really only come with mother tongue, but we use translation machines to approximate getting close to it. But I feel myself getting lazy using the machine, relying on the machine, not recalling the words or working or thinking that because I can make enough sense of it to operate, that I really have understood it in context. So the digital machines are useful. I'm not saying they're not, but they also entail a greater alienation and a loss. Okay. I want to say some more about in the next part about the argument about I mentioned Marx's argument, but I've often talked about that, but I mean making an argument now. So I want to get some of you to volunteer your project so that we can on the board work through it and like tear it apart and put it back together in a new way that has a strong argument. So the next rest of the class after the break will be more practical. Thanks. Have a 10-minute break.